Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamerica Ramsey. I am currently the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Law and Society. Now, we say here that this journal is a scholarly arm of the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights. That's where we are right now, and it addresses issues related to local, national, and international problems, mainly in public interest and society at large. So I just wanted to give you all a brief introduction to our second day of the symposium. And at this time, I'll be handing it over to Dave Mace, our symposium director and reviewing editor.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamerica, and thank you all again for coming today. I'm very, very excited about our panelists today. So I'll start off by just introducing each one of them, and then they will go ahead and share their information. So first, directly to my right is Dean Sheryl Kubiak. Sheryl Kubiak is the Dean of Wayne State University's School of Social Work and founding director of the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. Dean Kubiak's 30-year career has been focused on improving identification, services access, and intervention focused on the prevention or reduction of consequences associated with behavioral health disorders for those involved in the criminal legal system. In 2018, the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, began as a statewide center of excellence. The center staff of 40 full-time employees provides technical assistance, evaluation, and expertise to communities across the state to improve crisis response, deflection, and diversion from the criminal legal system. Dean Kubiak and the CBHJ team have interacted with multiple foundations and government entities to advise, implement, and evaluate cutting-edge work. Dean Kubiak has been appointed by various governors to state-level responsibilities, including the Criminal Justice Policy Commission, as well as the Task Force on Jails and Pretrial Detention. Most recently, Dean Kubiak was appointed by Michigan's Chief Justice to serve on the state's Judicial Council. So thank you for being here. Mr. Costello is to her right. So Matthew Costello joined the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice in July of 2019. Prior to joining CBHJ, he worked within the program services unit of a large Metro Detroit jail for 29 years, supervising the unit for 19 years. Matt's corrections-based knowledge and social work background have created a unique perspective on partnering, designing, implementing, and assessing jail-based services. He has a history of and continued passion for serving the at-risk populations that encounter our criminal justice systems. Mr. Costello serves as the manager for the Treatment Ecosystem Initiative at the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. He leads the implementation of treatment ecosystems across Michigan counties. Mr. Costello obtained his Bachelor's of Arts in Human Resource Development from Oakland University and his MSW from our own Wayne State University. And then directly to my left here is Judge Gant. So the Honorable Kameshia Gant was appointed to the Oakland County Circuit Court bench by Governor Gretchen Whitmer in 2019. She is assigned to the Family Division and has an adult treatment court docket. Judge Gant is a graduate of the University of Michigan and Wayne State University Law School. Prior to her judicial appointment, Judge Gant tirelessly fought for justice and equality for the voiceless while working as a consultant for the Neighborhood Legal Services of Michigan's Children's Justice Center for 15 years, and as a trial lawyer with her own general practice firm, Gant Law, for 13 years. She also served the judicial system as a probation agent for the Michigan Department of Corrections, judicial court clerk at the Oakland County Circuit Court, and as a judicial intern at the Theodore Levin U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. Judge Gant has a dedication to the legal community and civic organizations. She is active in several legal organizations and currently serves on the board of directors for the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan and D. Augustus Stryker Bar Association, and is the president of the Association of Black Judges of Michigan for 2022 to 2023. Judge Gant is dedicated to public service and is passionate about her mentorship of youth and issues involving social justice and education. And then finally, we have Judge Polis. The Honorable Yasmine I was appointed to the Oakland County Circuit Court in December of 2020. She is currently serving as the presiding judge of the Women's Adult Treatment Court. Judge Polis graduated with honors from the University of Michigan with a bachelor's in psychology in 2000 and obtained her Juris Doctor from Wayne State Law School in 2004. She served as the Assistant Prosecuting Attorney of Macomb County from 2005 to 2017, was General Counsel for Success Mortgage Partners from 2017 to 2020, and also ran her own law firm, the Law Offices of Yasmine I. from 2019 to 2020. Judge Polis is a member of several legal and civic organizations, including the Criminal Law Committee of the State Bar of Michigan, the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan, the Michigan Association of Justice, the Chaldean Chamber of Commerce, and the Chaldean Ladies of Charity Advisory Board. She is also serving a second term on the Governor's Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect and serves on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the National Association of Women Judges. And then with the judges today, we have Jillian Cantrell, mental health liaison for the treatment court, and then Nate Gilling, who is the treatment court coordinator. So I did just want to add that I am a graduate of the Oakland County Adult Treatment Court myself. I graduated in 2003, so 20 years ago. And I owe that organization my life and wouldn't be here today without it. So thank you. So with that, I will hand it over.
Hi, everyone. I really appreciate that this is happening because I think that the knowledge that is being conveyed to you is going to be so important in your careers, but not only that, in the lives of those that you interact with. And so I will say that I got involved. One of the things that wasn't on my bio was that I used to run a residential treatment program for women that was an alternative to incarceration here in Detroit back 30 years ago. And one of the things that I learned there was that the histories and the lives of the women that I was working with was in nothing that I had read. And this was, you know, we hear so much about trauma now. 30 years ago, you didn't hear anything about trauma except maybe rape trauma syndrome or shell shock veterans. But thinking about the women that I was working with who had trauma after trauma after trauma. And I will never forget one woman who I was working with who was 5 years old with a venereal disease and her mother had tried to kill her, who felt much safer being in an institutional setting than she felt in the free world. And that was just like a wake-up call to me. What do we do around people who have had these histories of cumulative and chronic trauma? And that kind of set me on my course. And I apologize if there are things here that you've heard before or that is redundant, but this is what I did my dissertation on: trauma, substance abuse, and the criminal legal system. So I'm going to truncate those 30 years of knowledge here. So the arrow is not moving. Okay, let me see. Oh, it goes. Okay, great. So I just want to start out by kind of some general demographic information, particularly around substance abuse and trauma. And so what do we know? We know that individuals who are now this is Michigan data. This is data that Matt and I and the rest of the folks at the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice have been collecting from Michigan jails for, I don't know, since 2015. So we're focused we work with the Diversion Council. And so we were looking at mental health issues of those who were coming into the jail. So when you think about first being booked into the jail, and we found that people with serious mental illness were much more likely to have an opioid or alcohol drug disorder. Older individuals were more likely to report a preference for opioids and alcohol misuse. As if you all know, the #1 drug of choice of those entering jails and prisons is alcohol still. Females are more likely, and goes true for jails and prisons, to report drug misuse in general, but also an opioid preference. Males are more likely to use alcohol, and white individuals were more likely to report an opioid preference and alcohol misuse than people of color. This is just a bit of a chart that shows kind of the number of risk factors individuals have. So we asked about substance abuse, mental health, recidivism, and homelessness. And so just looking at those with, SMI stands for serious mental illness, what were the difference between those with and without? And you can see on this chart that those who have this behavioral health disorders are much more likely to have more risks. And so that's what we were looking at, that it tends to be cumulative. Similarly, those with mental health disorders more likely to have substance use disorders. And so we call co-occurring disorders. I also think around trauma, what do we know? This was from a survey that we did in the Wayne County Jail of both men and women. And so prior to incarceration, 11% experienced a physical assault, 4% of males experienced a sexual assault, females, 45% experienced physical assault, and 36% experienced a sexual assault. Women enter prison and jail with much more extensive trauma histories, different trauma histories than men. Men are more likely to get into physical altercations. So what do we do with that information? And I believe very strongly that we can't just talk about trauma. We have to talk about a stress continuum. And what does that mean? That means that, have you ever taken one of those stress inventories where they ask you, like, has this life event happened? Has that life event happened? Like they say, moving, new jobs, divorce, those are all high stress things. But stress also happens in things like daily hassles, right? The traffic jams, the kids aren't ready on time. That's a stressor. Significant life events, that's what those scales measure: divorce, new job, things like that. But there's also chronic conditions. Are you living in conditions of poverty? Have you been unemployed for a long period of time? Then we get to trauma, which is defined as a life-threatening event. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum, because as an individual, you're experiencing all kinds of stress. So what happens when an individual experiences stress? What do you all do when you experience stress, right? You might go for a run, you might go out with friends, you might go out to the woods, you might have a glass of wine at dinner like I like to do. But what happens when the stress becomes overloaded is that those coping mechanisms become unhealthy and you overindulge, right? So you start drinking too much, you start being fanatical about maybe your beliefs and things, you start maybe exercising to extreme. So those coping mechanisms that should help you are now becoming more destructive. So what happens when you have a traumatic event? And that is, a traumatic event is something that you experience as a life-threatening situation. And interestingly, one of the things I was telling you about, the women that I worked with and having all of these horrendous things happen to them, but by and large, the most threatening event that they categorized was the loss of a loved one. And the loss of a loved one was usually their protector or someone that they went to for resources, but they experienced that as the traumatic event. We also know that when you respond to a trauma, there's flight or fight, but there's also numbing. And sometimes, and you will get this probably, when people say, why didn't you fight? Why didn't you react in a certain way that we expected you to react in this situation? There's something that is a freeze mechanism that's not often spoke about, but a freeze mechanism is also a normal response to a highly stressful event. We all know, and I've got a URL at the end about changes in the brain and what happens at the time of the trauma. This is particularly important for what happens when that law enforcement officer comes to that site of the trauma. How is that questioning happening? When does it happen? So those changes in the brain after a trauma are particularly important from a legal perspective. The other thing is, what are the current stressors? We can have the same event happen, but it will respond differently to each of us, depending on what other stressors we have going on at that particular time or what our history is. In any event, there is a painful emotional state that occurs. How do we deal with that painful emotional state? There's usually three things: a retreat, self-destruction, or destructive actions. So when we talk about retreat, we talk about depression, isolation, anxiety. So people who kind of remove themselves or withdraw from social situations. Self-destruction is where substance abuse comes in, because obviously it's something that you're doing to yourself, but also includes things like eating disorders, self-harm, and suicide. Destruction is aggression, and we tend to see women acting in self-destructive ways, where we see males acting in more aggressive ways. With a trauma happening, and like I said, to the same individual, everyone after a trauma will experience anxiety, depression, flashbacks. That's normal, usually 30 to 60 days. But it's after that 30 to 60 days, when some people, when those symptoms linger, that we actually go into a diagnosis of something like PTSD. And that only happens to about 10% of people who experience a traumatic event. What is the difference? Well, there could be pre-traumatic factors. Where, have you had previous traumas? What's your living situation? What's your gender, right? Peri-traumatic factors are associated with the type of trauma. So were you physically accosted? Did someone have a weapon? What were the circumstances of that trauma? And then the post-traumatic stress. Did you recognize that you had these symptoms? Did you seek help? Was there a supportive environment? All of those factors are going to enter into the severity of that traumatic response. There's also, and I brought this up before, chronic, which is long-term abuse over a long period of time. So things like child abuse, domestic violence, but there's also cumulative, where you've had several different types of trauma over the life course. And these particular types of trauma manifest differently. They don't fit a profile of someone who maybe was in a natural disaster and recovered. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend Judith Herman's book on complex trauma, because it does identify people who have been in long-term traumatic situations. And she said, while patients with simple post-traumatic stress disorder fear that they may be losing their minds, patients with complex disorders often feel like they have lost themselves. And I do think that that's an important distinction. You have to assume a trauma history. Stephanie Covington is a leader in this kind of trauma-focused training. And she told me a story about a dentist, and she was trying to explain this work that she does to a dentist. And the dentist said, oh, how would I manifest like assuming a trauma history in my dental practice? And she said, well, think about it. You're reclining someone, you're telling them open their mouth, like putting things in their object. You have to be able to let people know what you're doing, because that could be a trigger. So we always have to be conscious of what our actions are and how that might trigger an individual, and be very conscious. Here's the part you really want to know about. And I think that those of you who work in treatment courts have experienced this too, is that the coping, the use of drugs and alcohol is a very common coping mechanism, especially if you don't have access to a doctor and prescription drugs, right? But the illegal substances are going to find someone in a court of law versus the Xanax that someone with a prescription might be using. So minimizing, it's always to minimize symptoms that you're experiencing because of the trauma. But they also are very functional aids. I listened to a woman who had been sexually assaulted and could not have sex unless she was high or drunk. right? So she was learning to cope in the world. Many times, like if you can think about someone who, a family member has been the abuser, and yet you're going to family functions and the abuser's present, right? So how do you cope with the world without these substances? And that's the big trigger. And I think something to think about is when we're asking people to let go of their substances, when we put someone in a treatment court and we say, all right, you have to give this up, you can't, we're going to do a urine drop on you. What are we asking them? Many things, many times it feels like a threat to their survival, right? Because I can't keep going if I don't have this. And so you are threatening their survival often by asking them to give up this drug that's their best friend right now. I think that it is also disrupting and changing current relationships. If you think about your own social life, right? You know, how often do we hang out at bars or clubs, right? And if you say to somebody, oh, no, that's off limits now, you can't do that anymore, you're disrupting their social network as well. So I think that it's really important for us to understand what that means when we say you have to give up drugs. Some of us with really great willpower, that might be no problem at all. Someone who is using drugs and alcohol to cope with the trauma, that's a much bigger ask. I want to bring this up because when we talk about self-destructive behaviors and we talk about trauma, in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that clinicians use to diagnose people, it was a change a few years back that included anger as a symptom of trauma. It wasn't there before, but anger is a symptom, and it often is manifested in impulsive and in dangerous behaviors. And it might include irritability, aggressive behavior, so that I think thinking about clients who are sitting in front of you who do manifest anger, and if we can change the lens of what we're looking at when we see that anger, it's not personally directed at you, it may be a defensive mechanism. We understand that they hold a great deal of honor, anger, but it's also that survival mode of, you know, is it anger in where you're being self-destructive again, or anger out where you're acting defensively? But that anger is a manifestation of mistrust and the terrible things that have happened to you. I think it's also important to know that when you're working with somebody who has a trauma history, that they always have this feeling about being out of control, and that there's a lot of times where they're trying to control the situation and the environment, but may feel very powerless. And so how can you, you know, that inability to protect yourself, right, in situations, that inability to control the behavior of others, the inability to protect your loved ones, the inability to prevent being in a specific time and place. So often oppositional, non-compliant behavior is sometimes the individual's attempt to regain control of the situation. So I think that you have to accept anger and mistrust, and that understand that individuals who have experienced trauma might not trust themselves, right? Because they may have experienced feelings or situations of betrayal where a family member betrayed them. Their own bodies betray them. If you talk to sexual assault survivors, one of the secrets that nobody talks about is actually having a climax during a sexual assault. And that feeling of not being able to control your own body in that instance, right? How might that feel? So we have to think about how that manifests in that betrayal. I also think, and I took this slide out trying to control my slides, but I think that also depends on how are you working and forming relationships? How do you give back individuals more of that control? Because that's one way to mitigate the anger. So asking someone, here's your choices. What would you like? Asking someone, where is it convenient for you to meet? Where would you like to sit? Like giving people those little choices. Treating people with respect. You know, I do this work in prisons where nobody has a name, they only have a number, right? How much you can gain from someone by calling them Mr. or Miss someone, right? I also think that it is really important for you to accept that there's a power differential, right? As an attorney and a client, there's a power differential. And that for you to create more safety in those interactions, you want to reduce that power differential. You want to be more respectful as you can in those situations and understand that that power differential may be one of the things that creates greater mistrust. In treating trauma, the thing that we say a lot is that people cannot recover until they feel safe. And what does safety look like? What does safety look like if your neighborhood isn't safe? What does safety look like if your home isn't safe? What does safety look like if you can't be in a workplace where you're not harassed, right? So safety is a big issue, but it's also a concern for you in terms of thinking about how is that individual safe? How can I create safety for that individual? Because that will also increase the trust. I am not gonna play this, but if any of you have the opportunity, Becky Campbell is a scholar from the Michigan State University who's world renowned in trauma, and this presentation is a National Institute of Justice presentation that she does targeted at law enforcement about what happens neurologically after trauma and why asking someone the questions immediately after, there may be different responses because the brain is trying to absorb the trauma and trying to figure out how to reconcile this, that there's some shuffling in the brain, and so that it hasn't fully incorporated the event. So one of the things is that they say that you should wait 48 hours before you question someone to give the brain that opportunity to synthesize the information more clearly. But it's often, and I've seen police documentation of this, where they have called individuals, among other things, liars. But it's often because the story changes from immediately after till that 48-hour period where there's some reconciliation of what happened or what occurred. So I think Shay has the slides, and if you want this, it's there. But I would really encourage you to watch it and then to question the information that you received based on when some of this information was gathered. Okay, I will turn it over now to Mr. Costello.
Thank you, Dean Kubiak. It's always chuckle to myself when I do presenting. I always want to apologize to those high school counselors who said I predicted my life would be spent talking to judges, lawyers, and social workers. So, so thank you. It's a little bit of lightheartedness. The second is it's important to recognize what the dean just talked about and look at the people in our room together. We can't identify necessarily who is a survivor of trauma, and we just know people are amongst us. So we always walk or work in an atmosphere of being sensitive to those people whom we may not know otherwise, what their life experiences have been like. The other point is it was a funny, as I was trying to prepare for speaking today, was the word justice kept coming to mind, right? I'm from the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice. What it means to me is that I'm working in an environment where I'm looking for just outcomes for individuals who I come in contact with or for organizations. I just don't know. I think that's probably similar from a lawyer's perspective, but I think it's an important aspect to think about what justice looks like. Why is that important? Imagine running a county jail, and hopefully you all understand the difference between county jail and prisons. They're two distinctly different institutions and both horrible, right? But think about a county jail where 98% probably the people that come into the prison system start in the county jail level. And imagine the normal inflictions or issues that people have in everyday life. Diabetes, hypertension, dialysis, depression, suicide, trauma, whatever it might be. They come into the back door of the jail all the time, every day, right? People who use substances, right? So as part of maybe their trauma, we used to call that reaction formation back in the day, you know, people whom are using substances to help work with or deal with their trauma that they're trying to survive from or trying just to get through the next day with. All those individuals are coming in through the back door of the jail. Jails are constitutionally required to perform care and custody for every individual that comes into the jail. The custody part, whether you think it right or not, they are reasonably good at, right? Uniform staff. We're talking about deputies, right? The care part is where it gets a little bit murky, right? At least from my perspective. And I'm sorry to the dean if I'm outing, but I worked in a jail for 30 years. I saw what jail medical care was like, right? They will treat you as your symptoms present. Okay, so it's an important thing. But imagine a loved one of yours coming into the jail and they are being treated for type 1 diabetes or dialysis or for cancer or for pregnancy. And imagine that the jail then says, well, we'll wait till you become symptomatic before we do anything about that. As attorneys or future attorneys or judges, you would probably hit the roof saying, what the heck is going on there? You cannot do that. You have to treat people and provide them the necessary treatment to control those conditions. Makes logical sense, right? To me, it does at least. Why is it we treat people with opioid addiction differently? Why is it when somebody books into a jail and they are using opiates legally? Right? I'm not also talking about illicit opiate use, but why do we treat that population different to say, we're going to cold turkey withdraw you and we'll provide you a Gatorade just to make sure you stay hydrated, not a Gatorade, but they'll provide you some powder that you can mix with some nasty water to then drink to stay reasonably hydrated. And then we'll monitor your other systems for 3 to 4 days just to see how it's going. If anybody has ever experienced or seen somebody with opioid withdrawals, it is a horribly, horribly uncomfortable, medically serious situation. To say that an institution can simply say, we'll treat your symptoms as they become present is negligent, and negligent in the legal term, right? So it's amazing to think about, as before 4 years ago, when I started working indirectly with the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice on behavioral health initiatives, we started talking about and working with setting up an MAT program inside a jail, medication assisted therapies, right? Bless you. So what we do is we look to work with jails to institute a program that will treat people and their condition and their needs in a more professional, humane, and legally responsible manner. MAT programming or providing treatment for people who are opioid addicted is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's covered by the, and I have to probably refer to the judges, the amendments for cruel and unusual punishment, right? So these are actionable items if you don't provide that services. The ACLU has successfully litigated lawsuits throughout the country, indicating and holding liable and accountable facilities that aren't providing these services. That should be a shot across the bow. What's interesting though, if you ask a jail, and there's 72 counties in the state of Michigan, probably 70 county jails. If you ask them if they have MAT programming, they will always say pretty much, oh yes, we do. If you ask the intelligent questions and say, can you describe what your MAT program looks like? They will tell you, well, we make available naltrexone or Vivitrol shots to people who want it. Okay, that's one method. That is really not a medication assisted therapy program. It is not one that is going to protect the facility from litigation. So what we do, the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice provides this technical expertise to the jails. We've onboarded 12 jails to date. We onboard 3 at least a year through a contract with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to institute and expand and or build from the ground up an MAT program inside the jail. The center or the School of Social Work or Wayne State University is not the direct provider of these services. We don't have the capacity or the interest or the ability to provide all those direct services. What we do is we work with the counties directly, with the local experts in those communities to determine how to best implement this program. One of the ways that you can start with is this, and this is where the center stands in, is to make data-driven decisions. So we work, bless you, we work with facilities and we capture data to say, of the people that book into your jail, how many report, self-report, to be using opioids prior to the incarceration. You ask a jail that doesn't have an MAT program, they will not know. They will defer to their private for-profit in-jail medical provider who will tell them the number of people they have on a COWS protocol, a typical assessment performed by a medical person to determine if somebody is symptomatic with opioid withdrawals. But that is not satisfactory. So we institute and use a rapid opioid dependence screen. It's an assessment that we use at every book as a person comes into the jail that self-reports. It's 8 questions long. It's not something that Wayne State developed. It's a publicly available assessment form that is validated, that we use to collect data on the number of individuals that are booking into that facility who report to be opioid involved. Pretty simple process, but it creates a sense of proportionality for the jail. If you ask a jail about, well, we want to set up a MAP program and you have a census of 500 individuals, the sheriff is thinking, I'm going to have to service 498 of those individuals are going to want to be in this program. No, the rods will tell us, and we have data from all 12 of our sites that show that maybe you have a prevalence rate that goes from a low range of 12% to a higher range of 25%. So it creates a sense of proportion. It also allows the sheriff's office then to go to their county board of commissioners who are in the process of receiving settlement dollars from the opioid manufacturing pharmaceutical companies to say, we need a portion of those proceeds to build and sustain an MAT program in our jail. And here's our numbers of what our prevalence rates look like. That's a start. A second start is that once that individual books in and scores positive on the RODS assessment, that there be an availability to have 3 forms of medication provided to that individual if they're willing. This is a voluntary program. There's no coercion involved where somebody has to participate or is court ordered to participate, but it is a voluntary program. So what we mean by all 3 forms of medication, methadone, buprenorphine products, and naltrexone are the 3 most common forms of medications used to treat opioid use disorder. Methadone and the buprenorphine products are generally oral medications, daily dosed, and the Vivitrol or the naltrexone is a 30-day injectable. Each have varying degrees of efficiency or effectiveness. In the old school, when I was trained, if you can imagine a pool, a swimming pool, the deep end of the pool would be ideally used for methadone individuals. Those would be people with long-term opioid use, as well as levels of use. The middle of the pool would be less length of time using opioids, and the shallow end of the pool would be people who are newer to the opioid use involvement. So we want all 3 forms of those medications to be available to participants in the jail. It's important to remember that the minute I book into a county jail and I'm using opioids in the community, my body is already starting to go through a withdrawal process. I'm not at the height of my withdrawals. I'm not in the worst part of my withdrawals, but it is a physically addictive substance. When that substance is denied to me, I will have shakes, diarrhea, nausea, cramping, sweating, chills, and then some, right? So the important part of MAT programming is the moment the positive RODS is assessed and the minute that MAT medication starts. If we wait, or jail waits, I shouldn't say we, if a facility waits for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, 30 days to start treatment, that is negligence. They've already gone through the very worst of their withdrawals, and now you've neglected to provide the services for that individual for a situation that they did not necessarily have to go through. So we look for, when geographically available, to have all 3 forms of medication available. One of the things that we run into, though, however, is methadone is not readily available, and particularly in rural communities. So we have to be flexible to understand, if we're working in Kubiak County in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right, the westernmost county in the state, there is no methadone clinic within 2.5 hours of that facility. It's unreasonable to suspect or expect a jail to have methadone as being part of their treatment protocols, but they certainly can have the other medications, right? So medications, the availability of all 3 forms of medications. Every cessation or management program that you can ever think of talks about having concurrent behavioral health services. Gambling cessation, smoking cessation, weight loss cessation, opiate cessation. Talk about, if it's just a medication only program, here's your pill, go on the next day, I'll see you tomorrow. That's better than nothing, but it is not as effective as concurrent behavioral health services provided by individuals with expertise in dealing with that population. One of the clarifications I want to make with that, we work with the jails. If you think about jails, it's full of people who are just uniformed. They put me in my cell, they take me out of my cell, they take me here, they have no idea how to treat people with any kind of addiction issues. So one of the things the CBHJ excels at is we find resources local to that community and import them into the jail to provide these services. So when we are talking about behavioral health services, I'm not talking about necessarily a 12-step program, though that certainly is better than no program. We're talking about clinicians with specific training on working with people with opioid use or opioid use disorder. It's unsatisfactory and does not meet the standard to say that we just hand out medications and let people go on their merry way. That's insufficient and still can hold a site liable to the lack of those services being offered. So, all right, Acme Jail has now screening people, is now providing medication to everybody, and is now providing the behavioral health services. If they do all of those better than any facility in the country, they are still negligent potentially in one area, and that is on reentry. If a facility does a tremendous job in those first 3 aspects of service provision, but do a poor job at reentry, we've simply set a person up to fail and die. If we think about opioid use disorder, we understand that that's a physically addictive substances that's based on tolerances. If I'm in the jail for 45 days and I am released from the jail and I go back and use the opioid at the same level I was prior to the incarceration, I will die. My body has lost the tolerance, and all of a sudden now I'm using it at the same levels. There's a good chance I would die. I don't want to be so drastic, a little dramatic on my part, but it's still trying to drive home the same point, right? So when we work with sites, it's not satisfactory to say, here's a sheet of paper. When you get out, go see Acme Counseling and they can help you out with this. No, we work with our sites to say, what's the name of the clinic they're going to? What's the date of their dosing? And we're going to follow up with them post-release. Or we're not. The site is going to follow up post-release. We have to get somebody that next dose. There's a points of vulnerability there as a person releases. So now think about that. If you're an opioid involved individual in the jail and there's no MAT programming, and you've been in there for 45, 90 days, 10 months, and they do 1201 releases. So now you're released at midnight. The outcomes are predictable. To think otherwise is foolish or sticking your head in the sand. So one of the things we work with our sites are structured releases for those that have a known release date. So we work with our sites to say, you do 1201 releases. We're asking you to hold your MAT participants till that first morning med pass, because most places will distribute meds twice a day. That's another whole topic I could talk about. Most jails will only distribute meds twice a day, morning and evening. If you take a medication 3 times a day, guess what? It's only happening twice a day. So we structure our releases to say, don't release this person until this date, because now that buys us 24 more hours for that person to get to the clinic that we've established or the site has established they will go to for post-release treatment. We also think about jails. If we think about the Wayne County Jail, you think about, okay, that's great. That we're understand that there's a significant portion of the Wayne County Jail, the Oakland County Jail, the Macomb County Jail that are not county residents. So if your reentry plan is predicated on the idea that I'm going to, Matt Costello is getting out tomorrow and I'm going to give him resources that are available in Wayne County, and yet I'm returning to Kent County, you've set me up to fail. You need to customize your reentry plan to the community that the individual is returning to, right? To do otherwise is criminal. Dramatic term again, I guess. So the other point I think is important to recognize with reentry planning is that if you know about jails, you know it's a fluid population. It's great to think that Matt Costello booked in on Tuesday, he's got 90 days, this is when his out date will be, and then he'll be released, right? That is true for some. A vast majority of the population are released unexpectedly. They post their bond, they're released unexpectedly at court. There could be other conditions by which they're just released unexpectedly. Well, how do you manage and program a person for that? I just started in the MAT. You can't keep somebody longer just because they're in a program. That's illegal. So what we do and what we suggest, I keep saying that, what we have our sites do is that your discharge planning with individuals who are going to be MAT participants starts at your intake with them. We can't often say, you know, you have an appointment on March 17th with quality behavioral services for your next method. You just can't do that because it's not known. But you can say, Matt, when you get out, here's a list of resources you can go to that are relevant to your community that you're returning to. Is that ideal? No. Right? Again, is it much better to say Matt Costello is a known out date? This is his out date. We set up the appointment. Here's the date, the time, the clinician you'll meet with. That's beautiful and that's nice and clean, but it's not representative of how a jail population works. It's much, much more fluid. A vast majority of people are released prior to final adjudication on their case, right? So you have to understand reentry planning has to take place at the intake. Follow-up data is again where we go with our sites too, and I'll conclude with this. Sorry, Your Honors, is that when we work.
Go ahead.
Do a show cause here. So when the center works with sites, we talked about collecting that aggregate data of the individuals who book into the jail. We also collect individualized data. It's decisions like that or activities like that that we present back to the sheriff's office, back to the providers that they can take to their funding sources and say, this is the number of people that are served. We create what's called a cascade of care, where we paint a picture of from the time Matt Costello booked to the time that he released in the MAT program, this is what occurred for him while incarcerated. De-identified. We're not sharing any PHI or any information like that. We can present it in a de-identified manner. But again, it goes back to, okay, this is an unfunded mandate for the sheriff's office. There's nobody saying we're going to give you extra money for this. So what we say to the sheriff's office, the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice is going to create data reports for you that you can then take to funding sources, whether they be grants, whether they be their board of commissioners, whether it be other funding sources that I'm unaware of, to legitimize participating and funding part of that program. So it's helping sites make data-driven decisions. So that's our model. We've been successful. We have a certification process that has been recognized by the Michigan Municipal Risk Management Authority, which is a state insurance organization that insures a vast majority of the counties and jails in the state of Michigan as a validated program. And so we're very excited with the progress we've made. There's 12 counties that we've onboarded. There's 2 others that I was aware of before that, but there's 72 counties in the state of Michigan. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And there's a lot of that's not the right word. There's a lot of liability associated with those counties that have yet to onboard a full MAT program. Thank you for your time. It's been an honor speaking with you each today. And I hope that we can continue to have a robust conversation. In your honor, I'll turn it over to you and go from there.
All right, I was gonna point it back to you, but.
All right, so. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fine. I'm just gonna stop the share so you can.
All right.
So the focus is all on us. There's not even anything. Don't mind me. I have a really weird sense of humor. But my name is Kameshia Gant, and I'm one of the judges at the Oakland County Circuit Court, and one of the adult treatment court judges. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to talk to you in the building that I didn't know that I would return to as much after I graduated, but I love being back here in this building, and it brings back great memories. And so, you know, to have the opportunity to talk to you about the adult treatment court, which is something that my colleague and I are very passionate about, is just a joy. So thank you for having my colleague and I here today. So with the adult treatment court, you know, adult treatment courts are alternative judicial proceedings for participants that are non-violent offenders, and they have a dependence on drugs or alcohol. And so we utilize the adult treatment court in order to provide them with resources and programming to rehabilitate them and reintegrate them back into the community. And so most often it's done successfully. The adult treatment courts utilize a person-centered approach. It's individualized, and it's in an environment where they're supported. Particularly in Oakland County, we have a team approach in our adult treatment courts. And so part of the team that's here, I like to think that they're here to actually supervise the two of us. But, you know, we're really like a team, and our teams are consist of the judges. And so I handle the males with Judge McMillan. Judge McMillan's males have mental health issues, and the males that I deal with do not have any mental health issues. And then my colleague, Judge Poles, handles the females, all of the females. And so we have approximately 120 participants in our program. And so it's a team effort. We have a judge. We have members of the team that are from the Michigan Department of Corrections that serve the agents for the participants. We have the prosecutor, representatives from the prosecutor's office. We have a defense advisor. And then we also have people from the community, such as treatment providers that serve on the team. And with our adult treatment courts, we provide them with numerous services to address the client's individual needs. So it's not just there are set programs that they can participate in. Most often they can either participate in services that they've already been engaged in, or they can participate in programming that is provided to them, resources that are provided to them based upon the individual needs when they come into the program. When they come into our program, they're assessed, an individualized plan is developed. They receive therapy, they receive drug testing, frequent drug testing. They meet with a probation officer on a weekly basis. They meet with the judges on a bi-weekly basis, and they attend support group meetings. And so in this case, because it's an alternative judicial proceedings, they avoid jail or incarceration. Really, it's a graduated system if there's non-compliance, and we try to avoid incarceration. And we also, on the flip side of it, there are various incentives, and you know, we reinforce and support our participants for the good things that they do, good and bad. So even sometimes when the participant may not be non-compliant in one area, we try to focus on an area where they are compliant to provide them with the support. The treatment courts in general is utilize trauma-informed care. It's expected that we would use that. And when I say trauma-informed care, it's approaching, it's an approach to engage people with histories of trauma. We recognize the trauma that sometimes the participants come to with the program, and we acknowledge the role that the trauma that they've experienced plays in their lives. And so because approximately 60% of the population that participate in our treatment courts have moderate or significant trauma, we have implemented certain professionals in our program to assist them. And so we have a full-time master's level clinician. And we also have in our treatment program a peer recovery coach, someone who is a past participant in the program to assist them through the process. So it's a great program. From what the statistics say, more than half of the people that participate, I believe it's approximately 69%, they successfully complete the adult treatment court, and eventually it reduces, for our successful graduates, unemployment, recidivism, and so it has positive effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you like a brief overview of our adult treatment court. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague to see if there's some information she wants to provide you specifically about the adult treatment courts. And then we're going to punt it to Mr. Gilly, who's here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmine I have a criminal civil docket on the Oakland County Circuit Court bench. There are 7 of us on the bench who also have criminal dockets. Of those 7 judges, everyone has an option to be able to make a determination at the time of sentencing whether or not someone can come into the adult treatment court. All right, and so that is assessed basically based on information the court gets at the time of sentencing. That's really the time the judge really finds out what's going on in a case. That's the time the judge finds out what a person's needs are. There's compass scoring done by our probation agency, community corrections. So we're able to have an assessment and figure out who really needs to go to the drug court and who should be incarcerated. All right. It's a balance we all do. This is new in our space. Okay. For a very long time, that wasn't, that's not something that was considered. It is considered now in every single sentencing. What type of treatment can we get for this person so that they don't end up coming back into this courtroom? Because what we know statistically is if you're in felony court, because that's what's happening if you're in the circuit court, you're probably going to come back. Okay. All right. So what we do is at the time of sentencing, make a determination if somebody's eligible for adult treatment court. One of the big things that you need to be able to have an address in Oakland County to go to Oakland County Adult Treatment Court. Like Mr. Costello kind of touched on, it's, there's obviously a lot of people that live in Oakland County who come up to the court, but then there's a lot of people who are in different cities and different counties that can't come into our treatment court, that we kind of lose that control over to give them, any type of treatment, which ultimately I think with the work that everyone does, hopefully we'll be able to kind of get a handle on that. But at least for now, we are able to make a determination. So when someone comes in and they come in with their defense attorney, they know I'm going to tell this judge that my person needs treatment, because if I'm able to get into a treatment court, I can, potentially not have any jail time. All right. So it's really up to the court to kind of make a determination of who's really ready to go, who's ready to be there. And that's what this wonderful team that we work with makes an evaluation that says. So I can say, you know what, I'm going to send you to adult treatment court, and that's your sentence ultimately, which has a probationary term attached to it. But then it goes to these guys, and then they're really making a determination whether or not that person should be there. So when Judge Gant talked about if someone's a violent offender, I could still say if someone has an assault, dangerous weapon, but I see their history and there's a bunch of retail frauds and there's, different things going on here that I'm like, okay, what's really going on here? There's likely to be a substance abuse problem. I call Nate and say, Nate, will you please let this person into the treatment court? Because I think that they, could be somebody who could excel. So we do make those determinations all the time. After that pre-admission is done, they're assigned to different groups in our courthouse. Just like Judge Gant said, we've got 2 male groups, okay? Our biggest population, and reason that we need 2 judges is because of the more men are getting into adult treatment court. How many women do you think we have?
We have about 30 women.
We have about 30 women, and that's growing, even based on new legislation. Recently, our legislation says somebody who has an OWI third statutorily had to do a minimum of 30 days in the county jail. That was not discretionary. Judges had no discretion. They had to give that 30 days. Well, now, pursuant to new legislation, that person can avoid doing those 30 days by going to the treatment court, which I would say probably raises our numbers. Significantly raises our numbers. And that's a balance that we kind of have to watch too. And to make sure that those people have the needs to be in the treatment court. So ultimately, after that decision's made and they're separated into what group they have, I oversee the women's adult treatment court, which is great. It's a great honor for me to be able to do that. It's a great place to be, and it really shakes me out of what I do every single day. It makes me take off my judge's hat and put on a different hat, and even though I'm presiding over it, the treatment court is completely different. It's not meant, when we're sentencing someone typically on any type of felony, you've got lots of balances that you're making, and one of them is going to be discipline. All right, that's something you take into consideration. That's not how we don't look through that lens in treatment court. If someone makes a mistake or someone tests positive, if they own up to it and say, this is what happened and this is what made me get into this place, we don't say, I'll see you on a probation violation, which Nate hears me say a lot sometimes when someone keeps doing it. But the team reminds everyone to say, okay, but what is really happening? Let's talk about what trauma is going on in this person's life that is incurring it. Well, then when the team talks to that person, they find out they've got an eviction notice. They have to leave. They're in family court. Their kids are going to get taken away. Ex-boyfriend's back in the picture and he's hitting, because I have women's treatment court, hitting his domestic partner again. So different things that we have to take in balance every single day regarding trauma, criminal justice, as well as being able to get people through. So I'll give you some statistics that I have. So we know out of 128 of our Michigan circuit and district courts, we have 128 of 162 circuit and district courts have problem solving courts. There's different types of problem solving courts. We call it adult treatment court in the 6th circuit, but there's also DWI, there's juvenile treatment court, which we also have, and then family dependency, tribal, and a total of 137 there. Of 2,482 participants discharged from a drug or sobriety court program during 2021, we're not at 2029 yet, 59% successfully completed the program. Unemployment dropped by 91% for adult drug court graduates, 82% for sobriety court graduates, and 79% for hybrid drug court graduates. Within 3 years of admission to the program in 2021, graduates of all types of drug courts were on average more than 4 times less likely to be convicted of a new offense, which breaks down into nearly 4 times less likely to go back to using any types of drugs. And within 5 years of admission, graduates of all types of drug courts were on average more than 2 times less likely to reoffend. There's an overall average of 99% improvement in mental health and 97% quality of life improvement, which is huge. Employment, participants are able to get employment, go back out in the community. And this is a big deal. This is after someone's been in our treatment court for about 12 months. On average, it should be about 12 months. But sometimes they're there for 2.5 years till they get to the point of where they need to be, and the team keeps working with them. We try not to, let someone go just because they need more time or need more training to do it. And then at the end, a lot of times at our graduations, which is a really special time, you have someone saying, I hated you when I came in. My lawyer told me, get in this program. do what you got, but it's a tough program. Like we're talking about it, you can't even give you get the impression to you of how difficult it is. All the steps and everything that these participants have to do, and to be able to get through to graduate and maintain their sobriety through difficult lifetimes. We all have difficult things come up. It's not even things that we as a treatment team could anticipate. Life happens, things happen, and that person would otherwise go to that substance. That's what they need to survive and to make a decision, which we see all the time, which is the greatest feeling in the world, to say, you know what, Judge, I got kicked out of my house. I had to take my kids to a motel and there was a bar and I would have otherwise stopped there, but I didn't. I just thought of how hard I worked. I'm not going to give it up and I'm just going to go. And I went into that room. That moment we're like, yes, that is actually fixing the trauma, making the different decision at that point. It's a wonderful feeling. So I'll tell you numbers for Oakland County. 13,000 custodial arrests annually happen in Oakland County alone. There's 155,000 in our state. 2,430 of them are admitted into drug court. Almost 5,000 adult felonies are filed in the Oakland County Circuit Court annually, and only 100 people are admitted to the drug court. SCAO, the Supreme Court best practices, enrollment at 125 and supervision ratio of 50 to 1. And there's approximately 1,300 juvenile petitions filed annually in Oakland County, and of those, 10 become participants. So I give you that information to tell you that as much as we're doing and as far as we've gotten, there's just so much more work to be done, because we don't have, it's all those people that are getting incarcerated, like what we heard regarding the jails and our prison systems. A lot more people need treatment, but a lot of people are not saying that they need it, and we lose them and we don't catch them in time to be able to get them into the programs. And plus we all have certain capabilities and limitations in our programs of how many people that we can let in. Another thing that I thought was interesting, I know we're running out of time here, but it's about when we interfere, when intervention first starts. Okay, so if you think about it, in our state, when someone gets picked up for possession less than 25 grams of a controlled substance, that's going to be heroin, cocaine, fentanyl. That person gets picked up in our state. The first judge you see is in district court. But because it's a felony, that's not where your case is going to get adjudicated. So you see that judge maybe on 1 or 2 appearances. That person sets bond conditions, and there's immediately going to be no drugs or alcohol. You got a drug offense. All right. So that's where the clock starts for you to stop doing it. But that's not even your permanent place. That's not even your permanent court. It's not the last person you're going to see that ends up deciding your fate. And by the time they get into felony court, there's a statistic here that shows that the first time there's any kind of real interception is, at what's called level 3. Right? It's by the time you get over to circuit court where there's the judge that is going to ultimately be the person who sentences you that said, all right, let me take a minute here to actually see what's going on. So that's a big gap of time that would be also losing when someone who has a controlled substance problem, substance abuse problem, by the time they get over to where we can intervene. So that's pretty much all the information that I had. I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to share.
Yeah, so thank you for having us. I know we're running out of time, but just to fill in the gaps a little bit, you heard from the panel about what trauma is. You heard about mental harm reduction strategies. What we're doing is we're putting that theory into practice. So treatment courts are best served with a high risk, high need population. That's what data says works best. We do a series of screening and assessments when they come in to make sure that it is the right fit for our treatment program, to make sure that we're not doing any harm to these participants. Judge touched on it briefly, but we do have 4 different treatment courts in Oakland County. So we have our adult treatment court, which is by far our largest. We also have a combat veterans treatment court, a juvenile drug court, and a juvenile mental health court. It's important to note that the concept of treatment courts is relatively new. It's only really within the last 30 years or so that treatment courts have become more mainstream. In saying that, they are constantly evolving, and that's what we're doing now too. So Judge Gant stated that trauma-informed care is now the expectation, it's no longer the exception. So we really do try to take a person-centered, individualized approach with each of our participants, which is difficult having 125 participants at any given time. But if I could leave you with one thing, it's the fact that treatment courts do work. we did want to allow just a brief opportunity for questions and answers, but I will put it out there too, that if anybody's interested in seeing how we do this, you're more than welcome to get a hold of me, Shane has my contact information. We can set it up so that way you can come observe an adult treatment court session and really see how we operate. But we thank you guys for what you guys are doing as well, and you guys are the future of everything that we are involved with. But in saying that, are there any questions pertaining to our program or anything else that we discussed today?
We are out of time, but I'm sorry, as Nate said, if anyone does have questions, then please feel free to email me, and I will forward them to the appropriate people. And again, thank you all so much, and thank you all so much. I cannot express my gratitude enough for taking the time to come here.